So we made the frequency distribution, which is basically just listing the outcomes and how many times you get each outcome. We could also talk about the relative frequencies, which is the proportion of observations in each category. So if I wanted to add, I don't remember if I had a slide, it said we want to make a relative frequency distribution. I'm just going to do it on the same table so I don't have to recopy everything. So this number, or is a frequency. If I did the relative frequency, you have to know how many total M&Ms we have. So what would we do? Add them all up. 45 M&Ms. So to get the relative frequency, we're finding the proportion that is each color. So you're just taking the frequency we found yesterday and dividing it by 45. And typically it is written as a decimal. So you could leave a fraction, but we typically give it as in decimal form. So that would be 0.2667. So yellow, we had 10 out of 45. You don't have to write the fraction in that column. You can just put the decimal. That's fine. So that's 0.2222. Next one, 9 out of 45 was 0.2. 6 out of 45. 0.1333. 3 out of 45. So that is the list of relative frequency. Essentially, what this tells us, if we thought of it as percent, it's like saying 26.67% of the M&Ms were brown. About 22% of the M&Ms were yellow. About 20% were red, and so forth. What should that add up to, all of the relative frequencies? Yeah. If you're thinking in percent, we know 100% is the total. If we're leaving it in decimal form, then they should add up to 1 at the end. Add ours up. Did it work? So if we add all of our relative frequencies. And it did work out perfectly. It is possible that it would not be exactly 1. How could that happen? Rounding. We rounded a lot of these numbers. So if you got something like 1.001 or 0.9999, that's close enough. The difference is just your rounding. All right. So we understand frequency and relative frequency? Okay. So next, we are going to talk about how to display this. So we could have it in a table like that, or we could make bar graphs, a frequency bar graph and a relative frequency bar graph. We can do these by hand. It's not very difficult. Or we can use our Chromebook, Google Sheets, to do that. A lot of times I will probably have you do these on Google Sheets just because it is so much faster and it's easier to get things spaced out nice and pretty if we're doing that. Okay, do you guys want to try that? So to make a table in Google Sheets, go ahead and open that up for me. So first we are just going to input all of our data. I'm going to type this in and I am going to type the colors and frequency. And notice I'm going to go ahead and label those columns. If you put labels in this table, your Google Sheets will automatically move it into the graph later. So what do we have? Brown. Everybody have their stuff typed in? So then if you highlight those two, so we're highlighting our data, and then we can insert chart. Now, mine came up with a pie chart automatically. Google tries to guess what kind of chart you might want. So under chart type, we are looking for what it calls a column chart. So it looks like this. All right, and you notice it put my labels that I had for my columns. So it labeled my color, my frequency. It's got a title on it, but we could change that if we wanted. So we can change a lot of different things. We can move things around. In my chart editor, so let's say I wanted to call this M&M colors. Okay, I could do that and update my chart. If you did not include those columns, if I were checking this, I would want some kind of labels. So you could, under the chart and axis titles, do the horizontal axis and add a title if it didn't have one, or change it if you needed to. Same thing with the vertical, so those labels are important. Did everybody get a chart that looks like this? Okay. I'm going to resize that and move it over to the side. Next, I want a relative frequency. You can do a couple different things. Some people like to do the relative frequencies like we already did, where we just calculate them and then type in those numbers. You also have the option, Sheets can do a lot of it for you, so you can use formulas to have it calculate your relative frequencies, so whatever you needed. If I'm looking at this, it tells me the sum of that was 45. So then I know, and if you do like equals, you can do 12 over 45, and it calculated the first one. Do you guys know if you just click on this and drag down, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted it to fill my formula all the way down. It usually pops up with the option to just continue that pattern. But if I do that, divided by 45, mine did an autofill, and it asked if I wanted to calculate the rest of them. So just some shortcuts with Sheets. Does anybody need help with any of those?
Wait, how do you get it
to autofill?
No, to like do the
Okay. Easiest option. So type equals. That tells it you're going to put in an equation. And if you want it to be able to do them on its own, so just click the box you wanted. So I wanted this divided by 45 and hit enter, and then it's going to ask, should I keep doing this all the way down? And you can just tell it yes, and it did all the relative frequencies for me, so I didn't have to calculate every one of them by hand.
How do you get the?
So when I did my relative frequency one, how is that different than the first?
The numbers on the side.
Yep, the numbers on the y-axis. It had the decimals instead of the numbers, but the size was the same. If you highlight the first set you want, and then hold down Control and highlight the second set. Did everybody get both of those graphs to work? And you can change lots of different things about them, but this gives me everything I need. I've got my labels on my axes, got a title on my chart, so I'm good to go. All right. We're going to come back to this in just a second. Just as a side note, a Pareto chart, it's not something that I really will ask you to make, but it's just a bar graph where all the bars are in decreasing order. So if I look at the one I made, it's close, but to be a true Pareto chart, I have to switch the last two. So that's the only difference, just a bar graph where it's in decreasing order, but I'm not really going to ask that. So let's take a look at this example. The following data represents the marital status in millions of U.S. residents 18 years of age or older in 1990 and 2006. I want a side-by-side relative frequency bar graph of the data. So if I'm trying to make my graphs, what do we have to do first? Yep, we need to go ahead and put this in Google Sheets. I'm just going to delete out all my other stuff. Okay. I said I wanted a side-by-side relative frequency distribution. Are these numbers the relative frequencies? No. So I need to figure out all my relative frequencies. I am going to, I need it to add up all these. I want it to do it automatically for me. So if we go do equals, it's giving me a suggestion. It's saying sum. I want to do the sum, but I need to start at B2 and go to B5. So I just add up those four numbers. So it gives me that total. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make another table down here for my relative frequencies. You could put it beside the ones we already have, but I think this would be a little bit easier. Okay, so to get my relative frequency, I need to do that value divided by my total, which was 181.9 for 1990. 2006, I'm going to do the first one, divided by the total for 2006 was 219.7. And I got all of my relative frequencies there.
So I did the sum, and I didn't get the same.
So it tells you everything
Right there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The total.
Where'd you get that? At the bottom?
What's
You had like the Mary, did you like have to type it all in?
Yeah. No, wait, no, I just copied. I got this.
This number
This is.
divided by.
That's it? How did you get it? I'm so old. How did you get this?
You're welcome.
I did. So into summer home V5. It's not wait. Oh, it has to do that. It's like a order.
Now you're there.
And then this equals.
comma, it just adds those two
Yeah.
values, not everything between them. So then for your relative frequency.
So, wait, so C2.
This divided by the total exact here.
Never mind.
The sum equals sum. You just have to take the word sum in front of that.
It should be. It's called. What? B5?
Okay, thank you.
Did you girls get it? Why are we only adding B2 and B5?
Because you don't have
Here's what's
I
happening.
know, but why would it?
Oh, yeah.
It's just
No, that's what I was asking.
six down every time. So that's why we only want,
Why isn't that doing?
just type in 181.9, because we want to divide the same
40,
number every
44.
single time. Then we can throw that down.
Or
Divided by
Equals this divided by. Divided by the total.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we still have the option to just do these on a calculator and type in all the numbers. This just saves us a little more time if we have a lot of data. So I want you to highlight all of the relative frequency stuff, including my words. And I want to go to insert a chart. Okay, and it tries to guess what I might want. I don't want a pie chart. I want a bar graph. And then you see it gives me a side-by-side distribution. It's got the years, it has a legend, blue is 1990, the red is 2006, and it puts them side by side. Sometimes, just depending on how we want our format, we could do a horizontal chart like this. You might do that if you have a lot of words for your labels and you need more space for those, that can help. But that is what a side-by-side bar graph looks like. We have two sets of data going right next to each other. All right. Is this okay? The last type of chart.
I didn't mean to start. You did it the first time. Can you read it and see?
The last one that it wanted us to practice was a pie chart, but it's the same thing. We type in our categories, we type in our numbers. We've seen the pie chart has been its suggestion both times. So your chart type, you just select pie chart, and it tells you then, as long as you highlight all your labels, it will name your category and tell you what percent it fills. Are there any questions there? So that's really all I had. I want to give you guys time to do some of this in class because I know you don't have a lot of experience working with Google Sheets, or I'm assuming you don't. So I want to give you a chance so you can ask questions if you're having any trouble. This assignment, I have a handout for you, but there are a couple where it asks you to make something in Google Sheets. So I'm going to open up an assignment on Classroom as well. And so then you'll make your Google Sheet and then submit it there. Please label, like number the things on Google Sheets for me. Don't be that person that turns in something and I've got like a pie chart on top of another graph on top of another graph and I'm trying to figure out what in the world I'm looking at. Like try to format it so I can understand what it is. I would be eternally grateful.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I take my iPad with my classroom?
Oh, I don't care. Yeah, leaving it in here is totally your choice. You can have it anytime.
You should explain.
Oh, like do you leave the actual table? If you delete the table off, it'll delete